What's up YouTube? How are you guys doing? So today I would like to build a little more robustness into our AI agent. And if you haven't done so, we had an agent an introduction into the AI agent last time. And what I would like to do today is to make them production ready, right? To build a little more reliable agents that have a couple of fallbacks that we can add on to the whole flow and what you can do. And obviously you can expand on this and extend this to your liking, but we are going to get into a couple of basics. So the flow that we're going to build together from scratch will be this one, and we are going to get into a couple of strategies or a couple of points and how we can make them more reliable. All right, so the very first thing is that I have a demo database, a sample database, which just contains, a couple of sample leads that you can imagine could lie in your CRM, for instance. Then we are going to use Slack to actually use the human in the loop tactic that will enable us to have, like a double check in regards to what the AI agent will output and if you're satisfied with this, right? So this is what we are going to add and use. And then at the end of the day, we will just send an email to ourselves just to see how a potential lead would get this. So let's just say for context that we have this list of leads and they are somehow interested in our product or our services, and we want to answer them and respond to them appropriately by our AI agent, right? So let's get into it. So the first thing that we want to do is to use Airtable as a trigger. We are going to use on new Airtable event. So I have added this now. So this is the base that I'm using. This is the table that I'm using. I'm looking for them by ID after I have connected this to my account, and the trigger field will be the last modified date. And if I jump back into this, then you can see that this is the exact field name of the column that I'm using. I'm going to close this again. Next step, I'm already going to add the agent. So click on the plus, and then within the AI section, I'm going to choose AI agent. And within those options, I'm going to define below. What am I going to define below? The prompt. This is where we are using the prompt. And if you have watched my first tutorial on the AI agent intro, then you should be fairly familiar with this. So the second thing that I'm going to add as an option is the system message. This is basically the system prompt, right? Where I'm adding some kind of a character profile and what the main job and main task of that agent is. And within the user message, I am getting into the more specifics, and this is where I'm also pulling in and mapping the data that we got out of Airtable. All right, so now I have added both of them. So first of all, the system message and then the user message. We're going to take a look into the system message really quickly. As you can see, the first thing in regards to reliability is that you will add a prompt where you are telling the agent that you want a very specific output, right? So already with the prompt, we can increase the quality of the output that it generates, obviously, right? But this is something that we also have to keep in mind. For instance, here we are explicitly telling it that we want to have two fields, and one is the subject, one is the body, which will obviously be integrated into the email node at the very end. I'm going to close this. We're going to get into the user message for a second. And this is already it in regards to the user message. I'm telling it to write a reply email for this new lead. So we have the first name, the company, the message itself, then what he is interested in, and then the segment it belongs to. And then again, a reminder, remember, output only valid JSON with a subject and body, right? So we are basically repeating ourselves, but just to make sure, and we're doing this at the very end. So it already starts with the prompt. And by the way, if we take a look back into Airtable, then you can see that this is all the information we have, right? So it does include the message from the lead. We have the product interest and then also the segments and everything else that we could use. We are going to go with those three parameters right now. This should be sufficient. Going back into n8n, I'm going to close this node. And now the very first step is that obviously we also need a chat model. I'm going to add this here. I'm looking for OpenAI because I'm going to use the GPT model for this. Then this again is connected to my account, and the model that I will be using will be 5 mini. Going to choose this, and that's already it. I'm going to rename the subnode into the model that I'm using, just so that it's a little more clearer what I'm using. All right, so basically this will already work, right? But obviously we want to add a couple of fallback mechanisms. So the first thing that we are going to do is if we open up the agent again, that we want to toggle this very feature here. And this is basically telling the agent explicitly that we want to have a very specific output format that we expect it to output, right? That we expect it to use. So if I add this, and let's have a look into, or at the very bottom of the features, and I'm going to move myself out of the way. So when I toggle this, then you can see that we now have this output parser icon right here that we can add, right? And also n8n is telling us, or is giving us a reminder that we need to have an output parser connected to the specific agent, right? And this is what we're going to do. So if I click on this, or if I click on this, it's the same thing. then there's a sidebar opens and we have different kinds of output parsers, right, that we can use. So how do we want to interpret the data that it will be output by the agent? And what we are going to do is to use the structured output parser. And when I click on this, then you can see that we now have the option to basically tell it and give it the exact template, for example, of a JSON that we expect it to output also, right? So this is what I'm also going to do. So the one that I've prepared and the one that I'm using, I'm going to just paste this in here, and we can make this a little bigger. And now you can see that this is the specific JSON that I am using to later on work with this, right? Obviously, this will have to adapt to your specific use case. All right, I'm going to close this again. Now, something that we could also do in addition to not only that, although this is pretty reliable in my experience, is that we can use the auto-fix format option, right? And if I toggle this, then you can see that we have also just been added a so-called additional model for the specific autofix format, where we are even able to add a retry prompt, right? So if I toggle this one, then you can see that I'm getting an additional field. So what will happen and what will be sent to another LLM, right? And we can add this one at the bottom right here. And this will basically tell the LLM what has not worked previously, right? So this will give us another option, another run, how we can improve one of the previous runs that didn't meet our criteria, right? So we could add this as well. And something to keep in mind, and if we hover over this little question mark, then you can see this little note which says prompt template used for fixing the output. Use the placeholders, instructions for parsing rules, completion for the failed attempt, and error for the validation error message, right? So these are kind of placeholders that will be populated by n8n itself and then passed on to the LLM, so that we can be sure that whatever comes out of this very error message, that this will be passed on to the LLM so that it knows what to do. All right, so I'm going to disable this to not overcomplicate things, but keep in mind that you can even add another, fallback, another retry round to this by activating this toggle. I'm going to deactivate it and then I'm going to close this again. And now we already have the first reliability mechanism, if you will, to make sure that the quality of the output matches what we are looking for. All right, so the next step is, I'm going to open the agent again, is the next toggle, which says enable fallback model. And this is pretty self-explanatory, because if we open up this, then we are being told that we can add an additional LLM on the canvas and use this as a fallback model. And here again at the very bottom, you can also see that there has been added another plus icon so that we can connect another LLM to this. And not surprisingly, if we click on this one, then you can see that we have our selection of the common models that we can use, just as we have with the very first LLM that we are connecting the AI agent to. All right, I'm going to use a different model, obviously, because imagine if there is an outage at the backend of GPT or OpenAI, or if you have used up all of your credits and then you can't go on because you forgot to recharge, or there is no auto recharge option selected in your account. So these are all cases where we want to basically have a fallback, and obviously we want to choose another vendor for this, right? So let's just go with Anthropic. Going to select this. This is already connected to my account, and let's say I'm going to use, I don't know, Haiku for this. Haiku 3.5. This is pretty good with JSON as well, and this is already it. And again, this is just a fallback model, so in case the first run fails, we are going to get into the second run. I'm going to clean this up a little. All right, now we already have two mechanisms, right, that we are using. Now we are going to open up the agent again. And then we are going to go into the settings tab, which we haven't done yet. And here you can see that I have already activated the retry on fail option, right? And obviously this is also pretty self-explanatory. This is going to retry the whole run of the specific agent, node, in case it fails for some reason or it gets an error message, right? And you can set the maximum number of tries here. You can go to 1, 3, 10, whatever you prefer. And then it will always try to basically output and generate what we are expecting. Another thing that you could add, and I'm going to close the note again for this. If you take a look into the third option here, which says on error, then by default we have stop workflow, right? So if there's an error of some kind, the whole flow will be stopped. Now, but we can change this. First of all, we could use continue, which I wouldn't advise you to use, so that no matter what, so even if we get an error somehow, the rest of the flow will continue. But a very elegant solution is to use the continue using error output. And if we click on this, or let me just keep it on the default for a second, and I'm going to close this, and here you can see that the output of this AI agent is just this one path, right? And if I add the option within the settings again on error, and then I'm going to continue using error output, then you can see if I close this again that we now have two paths, right? Which obviously means that if it fails, we can build a completely different path that follows, the error message. So if there is something wrong, then another flow will continue, and we can, notify the appropriate person, or we can, email a specific technician who is able to handle this kind of error, or we can do whatever we want. But this is also a very elegant solution how you can at least be notified, let alone to build another, like fallback node, which would even continue the whole process. All right, so I'm going to run this and let's just see what it outputs for now. All right, so we got the first item. Now the agent is running. It's using our default model, the GPT-5 model. And now we have an output, and let's take a look into it. And now this is the output that I got. And this is also interesting because as you can see within the logs, right, this is or adheres to the various schema that we have put into the output parser, if we remember, right? So if I jump into the output parser again, then you can see that this is the template, right? The JSON example that we gave it, and it does adhere to this. And if we take a look into the logs, then you can see that now we at the very top, we have two branches. We have two tabs, which are representing the branches. So the success branch and then the error branch. So if you have multiple items, then you can see, all right, which one of those was successful and which was an error. All right, and if we take a look into this, then you can see we now have the content of the subject, which is this one, as this is called email assistant trial and EU data detailed for North Beam. So when I jump into Airtable, then let's just see, this is probably taking the very first record, right? And this is the message, so it does adhere and it does respond to what the client or what the lead told us. All right, next thing, same thing. Hi, Alex. Thanks for your interest in trial and so on and so forth. We don't have to get into the details, but now you see how this works. All right, so we have an output and we are taking the success path. And let's go on with another double check, if you will. We are going to use an if node. And by the way, if this was a little too fast, you can just click on this icon here. We're looking for if, and then looking for the very first result, which is the if node. And here we can add a condition. So a very simple condition in our use case could just be if there has actually been output by the agent a subject and also a body, right? So we could just double check if that's the case, or if the model messed up in some way. So we can just drag and drop from our subject object the content right into the very first check, and then we are going to say if it is empty or not empty, rather, right? So this is the condition that has to be met so that we can continue on the success path, right? So this is the first one. We're going to add another condition. This time we're going to use the content of the body, right? And we are going to use this. And again, we are going to say that this does not have or must not be empty. Now, another thing that we could use is to make sure that the output of the subject line matches the maximum length that we have defined earlier, right, within our JSON template. So what we can add is, for instance, to add another condition. Then we are going to use the content again, and then we are going to add a dot at the very end, which will give us a couple of options, right? And then I am looking for length, and this will give us the length in regards to the number of characters of this specific value, right? So if we take a look at this RE and then double colon and then email assistant trial has exactly, what was it, like 52 or 57 characters, right? And the maximum length that we have defined earlier should be 150, right? So we can be sure, or we can check if that is actually met, right? So we can put in the number, and then we are going to say that it has to be less than or equal to, and then we are going to pull in the value of this one, and then we can always be sure that it's actually matching this and not, like hallucinating or giving us false results. Now, and you can also see that in regards to the operators that we have between all those conditions, that we have chosen and, right? So this one has to be true, this one has to be true, and this one has to be true as well. And this already gives us a little more reliability and a little more robustness in the flow itself, so that we can be sure that the conditions that we have set earlier are really met. And I'm going to rename this node. I'm going to tell it meets criteria. And that's already it. All right, now we have an interesting part, which is that we are going to add a human in the loop node, which is basically a fancy way of saying that we as a human want to be involved in the process or in the flow itself somehow, right? Via approval, for instance. And this can be done quite easily. And there's even a separate section within n8n that meets exactly this condition. So if we click on this plus again, then you can see at the very bottom that there is a dedicated human in the loop section. And if I click on this, then you can see that we have multiple ways how we can be notified about a specific output or response that an agent has created, and we can take a look at it, right? And then we for ourselves can decide if we are satisfied with the results. So what we are going to do is to use Slack. And when I click on this, then first of all, you see that it is connected to my account, to the credentials that I have used. And the resource is a message. So I want to receive a message. And then there's the operation which says send and wait for response, right? So you can imagine now that the whole flow will run and will wait at this very node until I give some kind of feedback, right? And what type of feedback, this is up to us. So I'm going to open this up again. And the message that I want to send is to a user, which is myself. So I'm going to send this to myself, and the message will be, here's a new lead. And then I'm going to add the variables that will be output by the previous nodes, right? I'm going to run the flow again. And now you can see that this was the output that I got, right? And I'm going to drag and drop everything in here. So I'm going to tell it the subject, and I'm going to drag the subject that was created by the LLM. And then I'm going to add the body, going to drag this in here. And now we have the value themselves. So if I open this up, then you can see this is the subject and this is the body, and then I can take a look at this, right? And now if I scroll a little down, then you can see that there is a response type, right? And if I open this up, then you can see that I can approve this, or there can be free text, or I can add a custom form. We're not going to get into free text and custom form for now, but you can imagine what these options will do. But the approval step is really interesting, because this will give us the ability and the capability to approve or decline what the agent output with just one click. And this is a really efficient solution, right? How we can integrate the human into the process. All right, the approval options can be set here if I click on add option, and I am going to set the type of approval to both approve and disapprove. And when I add this, then you can see that there's an approve button label, and then there's a disapprove button label, and then there's a certain style they can add here. We're going to take a look at what this looks like in a second within Slack itself. And this obviously is specific to Slack because it's a Slack node, but it's a really elegant and nice way and efficient way how we can do this. All right, I'm going to choose approve and disapprove. Going to close this again. And now let's run the whole flow again. And then I'm going to take a look into my messages within Slack. All right, now the flow ran, and now you see, first of all, that down here, you can see it still says executing workflow, but we have this purple border, first of all, and then we have this little clock icon, which means that it's now waiting for a response, right? And now if we jump into Slack, then you can see that these are the messages, right? Here you can see I have tested this before, but it now says, here's a new lead, subject, trial, and EU data info. This is the body, and now I can read this very conveniently within my Slack messages, and then I can basically say approve or decline, right? And I'm going to approve it for now. And then I get this notification, got it, thanks, this page can be closed now. And if I jump into the flow again, then now you can see that everything is green. And if I open this up, then now you can see that this is the data that I got back, and it just says data approved true, right? And now you can already imagine what we're going to do next, which will of course be adding an if node again. So I'm going to add an if node at this very spot, and then I'm going to drag and drop the approved parameter from the node before, and I'm going to say is equal to, and by the way, this is a Boolean, I'm going to say this is true, and this will be the only check that happens. So I can rename this is human or manual approval. And when I only run this node, then again, this will be passed on, right? And this will be the true path for this specific if node, because early on or before that, we already have the approval by the human, right? Now, the next thing that we could do if this wasn't approved is just to connect the whole false path back to our agent again, right? I'm going to drag this down a little here so that you can have a better look at this, so that basically the whole process starts again, right? If we want to do it this way. Obviously, you can also just continue with, sending an email or forwarding the lead info to a human, and then we will take care of this 100% manually. This would also be an option, and obviously you can build all these fallback paths to your liking, right? All right, now the last thing that I want to do is just to add the send message node. So I'm choosing Gmail. I'm going to send a message. I'm going to send the message to myself for now. Obviously, you would send this to the very lead, right? Because you want to send this to that person. The subject will be from the previous nodes. So this will be the content of the subject line. Then this will be the content of the body. I'm going to switch the email type to text. I'm going to rename this to respond to lead. And then I'm going to execute this step. And now you can see that the whole flow runs again. And now the flow again is waiting for our response, right? So we are going back into Slack. And now we have the same message again. We can decline or approve it. I'm going to approve it again. We get the notification that it can be closed now. Going back into n8n. And now the whole process is finished. And I'm going to jump into my emails. And now you can see If I open this up, then this is exactly the message that I have just sent to myself, right? Hi, Alex. And then this is obviously the hard-coded email address from before. It did get the correct subject line. And we can be sure that the lead that got this email right now is definitely getting correct information because we have double-checked it and on multiple occasions. All right, and now you see that this is a really interesting way, and there are multiple tactics and mechanisms that we can use to build really production-ready, reliable, robust AI agent flows within n8n. Now, first of all, I would be extremely grateful if you would subscribe to this channel and like and share this video if you liked it and if it was helpful to you. And then second of all, I am building Skriptt AI School, where you will learn exactly those types of things that we have just taken a look into. So you will be able to build really robust AI agents just as we have done today. We will get into n8n basics. If you are still a beginner, then this is also definitely not a problem to start right here. We will get into rags, we will get into scraping and everything else there is. This will be a paid community sooner or later, but at the time of this recording, you can join for free. So if you join today, it will stay free for you forever. So don't miss out on this. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.